Chapter 3.
The First Spirit.
When Scrooge woke up, it was very dark. The church clock struck 12.
12?
Said Scrooge, surprised.
But it was after 2 o'clock when I went to bed. It's impossible. That clock is wrong.
He got out of bed and went to the window, but he couldn't see much. It was dark, foggy, and very cold. He went back to bed and began to think.
Was it all a dream? Was Marley's ghost really here?
He said to himself. Suddenly he remembered the ghost's words.
The first spirit will come at 1 o'clock tomorrow morning.
So he decided to wait and see. After a long time, he heard the church clock.
It's 1 o'clock,
said Scrooge.
and there's nobody here.
At that moment, there was a great light in the room, and the curtains of his bed opened. Yes, a hand opened the curtain in front of his face. He sat up and saw a strange person. It was small, like a child, but it was also like an old man. Its long hair was white, but its face looked young. It was wearing white clothes with summer flowers on them. There was a piece of green holly in its hand.
Are you the first spirit?
Asked Scrooge.
Yes, I am.
The visitor replied in a quiet voice.
Who and what are you?
I am the ghost of Christmas past.
Whose past?
Your past.
Why are you here?
To help you.
I thank you.
Scrooge said.
If you want to help me, let me sleep.
Get up and walk with me,
said the spirit, and it took his arm. Scrooge wanted to say that it was late, the weather was very cold, and his bed was warm. But the spirit took him to the window.
No, I'll fall,
Scrooge said. The spirit put its hand on his heart.
If I touch you here, you won't fall,
it said. Then they went through the wall, and suddenly they were standing on a road in the country. There was snow in the fields.
Good heavens,
Scrooge cried.
This is where I was born. I was a boy here.
And he remembered all his old feelings about the place.
Your lip is trembling,
said the ghost.
Are you crying?
No,
answered Scrooge, but a tear fell from his eye. They walked along the road towards a little town with a bridge, a church, and a river. Some boys came out of a school. They were laughing and singing because it was a holiday. They shouted, "Merry Christmas!" to each other.
They are all in the past,
the ghost said.
They are only shadows.
Scrooge knew all of them, and he felt suddenly happy. Why did his cold eyes and heart become warm with joy? What did Merry Christmas mean to him? He didn't like Christmas.
The school is not empty,
said the spirit.
One child is still there. He hasn't got any friends.
I know,
Scrooge said, and there were big tears in his eyes. They went into the school, a big, old, dark place. Inside there was a long classroom. It looked sad and empty, with only a few desks and chairs in it. A little boy was sitting at one of the desks. He was reading a book by a small fire. Scrooge sat down on a chair and cried, because he knew that the little boy was himself many years ago.
That's me,
he said.
I was left here one Christmas. Poor boy. Oh, I would like to, but it's too late now.
What is it?
Asked the spirit.
Nothing. You see, there was a poor boy outside my office last night. He was singing a Christmas carol, but I didn't give him anything, and I told him to go away.
The spirit smiled.
Let's see another Christmas.
Then everything changed. The boy was bigger, and the room looked older and darker. Scrooge saw himself again. He was walking sadly up and down. Then the door opened and a little girl ran in. She was younger than the boy.
"Dear, dear brother,"
she said happily, and she put her arms round his neck and kissed him.
"I've come to bring you home, home."
Home, Fanny?
The boy asked.
"Yes, home forever and ever."
The girl laughed.
"Father is kinder now, and he wants you to come home. He sent me in a coach to fetch you. Oh, you'll never come back to this horrible school, and we'll be together for Christmas. I'm so happy."
She began to pull him towards the door.
Bring Master Scrooge's luggage to the coach,
somebody shouted in a terrible voice. It was the teacher, and when he came in, the boy was very frightened.
Goodbye, Master Scrooge,
said the teacher in his terrible voice.
Goodbye, sir,
the boy answered, trembling. But when he got into the coach with his sister, he felt happy.
Your sister had a very good heart,
said the ghost.
When she died, she left one child, your nephew.
Yes.
Scrooge remembered the conversation with his nephew in his office the afternoon before, and he felt bad about it. Suddenly, they were standing at the door of an office in the city. It was Christmas again.
I know this place very well. And there's old Mr. Fezziwig, alive again. Oh, dear old Fezziwig.
Mr. Fezziwig was a fat, happy man with a red face. He was working at a desk.
"Hey, Ebenezer! Dick!"
he shouted.
"Stop your work!"
Scrooge, now a young man, came in with his friend Dick.
"It's Christmas Eve, boys. We must celebrate,"
said Fezziwig.
"Let's stop work and close the office."
So they put away all the books and papers and made a big fire. Then a man came in and started to play the violin. Mrs. Fezziwig and the 3 Miss Fezziwigs arrived. And then a lot of young people came, and everybody began to dance to the music. Then there were games and more dances, cake and hot wine and more dances. And there was lots of roast beef and beer and mince pies too. It was a wonderful party. At 11 o'clock, everybody said, "Merry Christmas!" and the party finished. While Scrooge was watching all this, he laughed and sang and wanted to dance. He remembered it all and enjoyed it very much.
You and Dick and everybody loved Mr. Fezziwig,
the ghost said to him.
But why? That party was a very small thing. It cost only £3 or £4. So why did you all love him so much?
A small thing?
Answered Scrooge.
No, Fezziwig was our manager. So he could make us happy or unhappy. He could make our work easy or hard. He gave us a lot of happiness, and that was like a fortune in money.
Then Scrooge looked sadly at the ghost.
What are you thinking about?
It asked.
I was thinking that I would like to speak to my clerk now.
Come, there isn't much time,
said the ghost.
We must be quick.
At that moment, the scene vanished, and they were standing in the open air. Scrooge saw a man of about 40. It was himself again, and his face showed the first signs of the problems of business and the passion for money. He was sitting next to a young girl dressed in black. It was his fiancée, Belle. She was crying quietly.
"You love something more than me, Ebenezer,"
she said. What?
"Money. You are afraid of life. You are afraid of the world. And so you do only one thing. Make money. Then you feel more secure. Money is your passion now."
No, he said angrily. My feelings for you haven't changed, Belle.
"But you have changed. When you promised to marry me, you were a different person."
I was a boy, he said.
"And so my love is nothing to you now. You aren't happy with me, and you don't want to marry me."
I've never said that.
"Not in words, no. But I know it's true. I haven't got any money, so you don't want me. Well, you're free to go. I hope you will be happy.
And Belle went sadly away.
Spirit,
Scrooge cried.
don't show me any more. Take me home.
There's one more scene.
No, no more. I don't want to see it.
But suddenly they were in a room where a beautiful young girl was sitting near a big fire. Next to her sat her mother. This was Belle, now older. The room was full of children, and there was a lot of noise. But Belle and her daughter liked it, and the daughter began to play with the children. Then the father came in with a lot of Christmas presents. He gave them to the children, and they laughed and shouted happily. Finally, they went to bed, and the house was quiet. The father sat by the fire with his wife and daughter. Scrooge looked at them and thought,
How sad that I don't have a wife and daughter.
Belle,
said the husband to his wife,
I saw your old friend this afternoon.
Who was it? Mr. Scrooge?
Yes, I passed his office window and he was there. He hasn't got a friend in the world. His old partner Marley is dying.
Spirit, take me away.
said Scrooge.
These things happened,
The ghost answered.
and they cannot be changed.
Please take me back. I can't watch this anymore.
At that moment, the spirit disappeared and Scrooge was in his bedroom again. He felt very tired, so he got into bed and fell asleep. Chapter 4.
The second spirit.
Scrooge woke up, opened his bed curtain and looked around. He was ready to see anything, but when 1 o'clock struck, nothing happened. After a while, he saw a strong light in the next room. He got out of bed and went slowly to the door.
Scrooge,
Said a voice.
come in, Ebenezer.
The room was his room, but it was different. On the walls there was some green holly with red berries and mistletoe and ivy. In the fireplace was a great fire. On the floor there was a lot of food. Turkey, goose, chicken, rabbit, pork and sausages, as well as mince pies, puddings, fruit, cakes, and hot punch. And on the sofa sat a very large man, a giant, and he was holding up a torch,
Come in.
said the ghost. Scrooge went and stood in front of this giant, but he didn't look at it. He was too frightened,
I am the ghost of Christmas present.
said the spirit.
Look at me.
So Scrooge looked. He saw that the spirit was smiling. It had kind, gentle eyes. There was holly round its long, dark hair. Its face was young and happy,
You have never seen anybody like me before,
it said.
Never.
and you have never met any of my brothers.
No. How many brothers have you got?
More than 1,800. I am the youngest.
Spirit,
Scrooge said.
take me where you want. I learnt a good lesson last night.
Touch my clothes.
When Scrooge did this, the room disappeared, and he stood in the city streets on Christmas morning. There was a lot of snow. Some people were playing and throwing snowballs. Others were buying food in the shops. It was a busy, cheerful scene, and the bells were ringing. Then a lot of poor people came along the street with their Christmas dinners of goose or chicken. They were taking them to the bakers' shops to be cooked in the oven. The spirit took Scrooge to one of these shops and touched some of the dinners with its torch.
What are you doing?
Scrooge asked.
I am making these dinners extra good so the people will be happier.
It replied, smiling. After a while, Scrooge followed the ghost to the suburbs of the city. They went to the house of Bob Cratchit, his clerk. The kind ghost touched the house with its torch. Then they went in. Mrs. Cratchit and her daughter Belinda were preparing the table for Christmas dinner. Young Peter Cratchit was helping them. Suddenly, 2 little Cratchits ran in and shouted that the goose was ready at the baker's. Then the oldest daughter, Martha, arrived, and after her came Bob, with his little son, Tiny Tim, on his shoulder. The child was a cripple, and he walked around on a small crutch. Young Peter went to fetch the goose. When he came back, all the children in the family shouted, "Hooray!" because they didn't often eat goose. Belinda made some apple sauce. Mrs. Cratchit prepared the potatoes and the gravy. Martha put the hot plates on the table. Finally, everything was ready. When Mrs. Cratchit cut the goose, everybody cried, "Hooray!" again, and Tiny Tim hit the table with his knife. The goose was small, but they all said it was the best goose in the world, and ate every bit of it. Then Mrs. Cratchit brought in the Christmas pudding with brandy on it. She lit the brandy with a match, and when they were all eating, they said, "Oh, lovely pudding."
What a wonder.
Nobody said or thought that it was a very small pudding for a big family. After dinner, the Cratchits sat round the fire. They ate apples and oranges and hot chestnuts. Then Bob served some hot wine.
A Merry Christmas to us all,
He said.
Merry Christmas!
The family shouted,
And God bless everyone.
said Tiny Tim in his weak voice. He sat very near his father. Bob loved his son very much, and he held Tiny Tim's thin little hand.
Will Tiny Tim live, Spirit?
Scrooge asked.
I see an empty chair
Replied the ghost.
and a small crutch, but not Tiny Tim. If the future does not change, the child will die.
No, no.
Said Scrooge.
Say he will live, kind Spirit.
If the future is not changed, he will not see another Christmas. But you think that's a good thing, don't you? You said there are too many people in the world.
Scrooge didn't answer, and he didn't look in the ghost's eyes. He felt very bad.
Those were wicked words, Ebenezer Scrooge.
The ghost continued.
Do you think you can decide who will live or die? Are you better than this poor man's child, or millions like him? Perhaps you are worse in God's eyes.
Scrooge trembled and looked at the ground. Suddenly, he heard his name.
Mr. Scrooge, let's drink to Mr. Scrooge.
It was Bob Cratchit, and he was holding up his glass.
Drink to Mr. Scrooge?
Said Mrs. Cratchit angrily.
Drink to that hard old miser? What are you saying, Robert Cratchit?
My dear, the children. It's Christmas Day.
I know that, but I would like to tell Mr. Scrooge what I think of him. You know how bad he is.
My dear, it's Christmas Day.
Well, I'll drink to him because it's Christmas. A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, Mr. Scrooge, but you won't be merry or happy, I know.
The children drank to Scrooge too, but his name was like a dark shadow in the room, and for a few minutes they were silent. Then they told stories and sang songs, and they felt better. The Cratchits were poor, and they looked poor. Their clothes were old. There were big holes in their shoes. Bob Cratchit's salary was very small. He never had enough money, and there was never much food in the house. But the family was contented now because it was Christmas. Scrooge watched them carefully. He listened to them well, and he looked at Tiny Tim very often before the family scene vanished. It was dark now, and snow was falling. Scrooge and the ghost walked along the streets and saw great fires in the houses where families and friends were enjoying Christmas together. The ghost was happy to see the celebrations. It laughed, and where it passed, people laughed too. And then Scrooge heard a loud, happy laugh. It was his nephew's. He saw him in a bright, warm room. When his nephew laughed, the other people in the room laughed with him.
He said that Christmas was a humbug.
The nephew laughed,
And he believed it too.
He's stupid and bad, Fred.
said his wife.
Well, he's a strange man, and he isn't very happy.
But he's very rich, Fred.
Yes, my dear, but he doesn't do anything with his money. He doesn't help others, and he lives like a poor man.
Nobody likes him. I don't like him. He makes me angry.
I'm not angry with him. I feel sorry for him because he doesn't enjoy his life. He never laughs. He didn't want to eat with us today, but I'm going to ask him every year. I'll say, "How are you, Uncle Scrooge? Come and eat with us."
Then they played some music and sang. After that, there were games. When they played 20 questions, Scrooge forgot that they couldn't hear him, and he shouted his answers. Then his nephew thought of something, and everybody asked him questions.
Is it an animal?
Yes.
Does it live in the city?
Yes.
Is it a horse?
No.
It wasn't a dog, a cat, or a pigeon. It made horrible noises. Sometimes it talked, and nobody liked it.
I know what it is!
Shouted Fred's wife.
It's your Uncle Scrooge!
She was right,
A Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to the old man.
said Fred. Scrooge wanted to say this to Fred, but the scene vanished, and he and the ghost travelled again. Scrooge noticed that the spirit looked older. Its hair was grey now.
Is your life so short?
He asked.
Very short. It ends tonight at midnight. It's 11:45. I haven't got much time. Look down here.
The spirit opened its coat, and Scrooge saw 2 children on the ground, a boy and a girl. They were very thin. Their clothes were old and poor, and they were trembling with cold. They looked very hungry. Their eyes were sad. They looked older than children, and they were ugly, like monsters. Scrooge was shocked.
Are they yours?
He asked.
No, they are man's. They belong to humanity.
Haven't they got a house or a family?
Aren't there a lot of prisons?
The spirit replied.
And aren't there any workhouses?
Oh, no, no! Those are my words.
Scrooge cried. The church clock struck 12. He looked around for the ghost, but it wasn't there. Then he remembered old Jacob Marley's words.
The third spirit will come at 12 midnight.